Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. Today we are going to be working with the Daisy Layers Stamps and Dies. And that's it. Those are the only two products that we need. So we're going to be doing a technique where we are coloring on dark colored cardstock. And so to get that no line look, we are going to stamp in colored ink. Now we do have a no line ink, which works really well on white cardstock, but something like that on colored cardstock isn't really going to show up too well. So stamping in the same color ink as my cardstock is going to still show up because it's going to be a few shades darker, but isn't going to compete with the final image. And just like when I stamp things in a black, I ended up stamping this twice. And this is a large enough bouquet that it's going to fill up our entire card front. So I'm not going to have to do anything besides just this image. You could use any, well, really any image, but I prefer floral. I prefer florals. So, and then after that here, like I didn't get a good stamp. I had to really get into those middles of the daisies. But then after that, I've pulled out some colored pencils. I'm using Prismacolor colored pencils. And one of the things here is you want to make sure that they are sharpened, that you have a good point on them. I used to be one of those people who was like, really doesn't matter. And I'm going to tell you, in order to get into little nooks and crannies and not blow out your lines, it actually does matter. It really does matter. So you want to make sure that they are nice and sharp. And then we're going to talk about 3 different ways that we can go about doing this. So if you have struggled with no line coloring, and I have, if you tell me that you haven't, I'm going to tell you you are a unicorn. There are a lot of times where our approach about it can turn things into kind of like blobs, and we lose the lines and the separation to help our images be clear. So one of the things that you can do is work in smaller sections. So I'm starting with my white colored pencil, and this is going to be the base for, I'm going to show you, like I said, I'm going to show you 3 different ways. So the white is going to help it to be brighter. If you are using lighter colored pencils, like here you can see I'm just going in and I'm just using my lightest color, which for me is, let me look, chartreuse. You can still see it, but it is not as bright. The third option is to go in with your white as your base and then color your lightest color on top of that. But then the way that you approach it from there changes. So honestly, I kind of probably do a hybrid of all 3 depending upon my time constraints. But I wanted to show you so that you know what they look like. So for this first one, we put down a layer of white, we put down a layer of our lightest color, and then we're going to go back in with another layer of white. This is the way that I was originally taught this technique, and that was from Lydia Fiedler. She is Understand Blue on YouTube, and she is terribly talented. And she had like an image that was glowing. And so she taught me that basically you want to put like a layer of white in between the other layers of color. And so then after that, you're going to go to your next darkest color. So you can see for the other ones, I did not do another layer of white on the white base. And for the ones that were using the regular colors, I didn't put any white at all. And then we're going to go from our mid-tone to our lightest color. We're going to fill that out. And you can tell the one that has no white underneath it is darker. The one that has 1 layer of white is brighter, and the one that has 2 layers of white is brighter still. And you can kind of play around with this with as many layers as you would like. Once you fill up the pulp of your paper, you really can't add any more pigment because that's what you're doing. You're filling up the fibers with these pigments from the pencils, and that's what's giving you that solid concentrated color. So you can go over them once, twice, a couple of times. You can work them however many times you would like in order for you to get the result that you're looking for. And when I say I do a combination of these, it really depends on what it is, like the look that I'm getting. But most of the time, I'll be honest, I do the lazy way. I do 1 layer of white because I like the brightness, and then I just do the rest with my colors. I just move out with my colors. I don't do layers of white in between most of the time. So then we're going to move on to the centers of the flowers. So working in these smaller pieces is going to help us to retain the shape of our objects. So that way we don't have the edges blurring. If I went in and colored this whole flower white in one go, we would have no idea where any of the petals were, where any separation was. That's not going to work for what we're trying to accomplish here. So again, I'm doing the white, and then I went in with my yellow. I'm going to go in with my darker color. This is sienna brown. And here, honestly, just because I happen to be working on my color theory class at the same time, this is more of what we call an analogous color combination, and that's why it works so well together. So then I just, go through the darkest color and then back out through the lightest. There's like 2 or 3 types of greenery in this bouquet. I chose to do most of them like that bright kind of spring green, but there are a couple of them to break it up that I did do like an olive combination. This is one of them, and the technique doesn't change depending upon what I'm coloring. It just, the colors that go on top change. But in order, like I said, we want to be working in small bites in order to keep that separation and to keep our shape. Because once things start to get blobby, it can get very easy to get discouraged about what it is that we're coloring and then just give up altogether. We don't want to do that because we have stick-to-itiveness and everybody's on their own art journey. We're all at different places, but we're not going to get any better, myself included, if we don't practice. So then work out again to that lightest color. This one is a little bit darker just because it's an olive. I have a tendency to like the brighter greens, but whatever it is that works for you. The other thing about this card that is a little bit different than what I would normally do is my daisies are white. It can be challenging to color things white, whether you are coloring them white in marker, colored pencil, paint, watercolor, like whatever it is you're doing. It can be a little bit difficult to do white. So again, I'm not doing any petals that are touching each other, keeping that separation. That's almost along the same principles of what you do with watercolor, where you don't let them touch. So here, I'm not letting them touch because I want that separation. So I do my base layer of white, which is very light, and then I'm going to go back in towards the center of the flower. We add shading where 2 objects meet or where one object lays on top of the other. And then I'm going to add darker shading there with the white, so just more concentrated color. And then for my shading, you could shade this with a lot of other colors. White typically reflects like what is around it. I just chose to do it with black because that was the easiest way that I could think to teach you this. And so I'm just going in with my black colored pencil and I am adding the shading where it is meeting the center of the flower. Where one petal is falling behind another, I am adding some shading kind of like to the left and right hand side. And then I'm blending it back out with that white. And so it is going to add a little bit of shading to the petals, but not so much so that we are we don't want it to be a gray daisy, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We want to make sure that the shading is there and it's creating that separation, but it's not overcrowding. We still want the majority of the petal that we're coloring to be white. And since we're using pencils, it's really kind of easy to make sure that we have that fine tip and that we can get into those little nooks and crannies. And then that way we can just blend it out. Now you can color it in more solid if you would like. You'll have a little bit less dimension, or you can leave the edges kind of a little bit, what's the word that I want? Less solid, a little bit. I don't want to say rougher, just with a little bit less color. So, it's kind of like a softer shade at the end. We'll see some of that green cardstock kind of peeking through, but honestly, I don't mind that. I think that that's okay. So then here, I want you to be able to see how each petal is kind of coming together as it is meeting the other petals. Here I can tell that my pencil is getting a little flat, and so I'm just going to resharpen it. I would keep your sharpener on hand. That way, you know, you have it as you're working through, and especially you can see how you can see how short this little white pencil is, and so you can tell that that's like one of my most used pencils, and it is, because I use it frequently to do, like, if I'm going to color with colored pencils, then I'm typically going to color it where it is more dramatic. I just prefer, I guess, techniques that have a lot of contrast. And so this particular one, using the white, is something that I enjoy very much in order to get those bright colors onto dark cardstock. So with that said, I am going to tried to include the majority of what I was coloring here, just so that way you could slow it down if you needed to, and you would still be able to see, you know, how all of those things are coming together. But I did not include all of the coloring, you know, for every single flower. I just wanted to give you kind of an overall picture of how to work them, especially when you're doing a no-line image like this, where you have a bunch of flowers or a bunch of items together where they're like right on top of each other. What does this have in it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 daisies. So there is quite a few in just this little area itself. But remember, if you're having a hard time, you could always slow it down. YouTube has that little gear icon that you can click on, and it will allow you to speed it up or slow it down. Because maybe you're like, Kelly, I don't want to listen to you talk. I'm over it. So then once we're done with those daisies, they do have like these little sprigs that are kind of like around those leaves that are a bit different. And so I wanted to do those like a true yellow, whereas the centers are more of like an orangish yellow. I wanted these to be like a bit of a bright yellow, to kind of, I didn't want to distract. You know what I'm saying? I didn't want to distract by bringing in another color. And you can use your daisies and do your daisies in a bunch of different colors, but I really like the yellow centers and the bright white on the dark cardstock, and so I didn't want to distract from that. So I just did them yellow. I did the same thing. I colored them in white, but they're really just little buds, little teeny tiny buds. So you don't need to do a ton of shading on top of them in order to get them to be yellow. So I kind of cut the middleman out. I have the darker, like that sienna brown, the golden kind of yellowish orange color, and then a bright yellow. I skipped that middle color, that golden orangish color, and just went straight into my yellows. And because there's such a small amount of real estate, that worked really well for those to be nice and bright. And then you do definitely want to have sharp tips for doing your greenery, like the thin stems. We want to make sure our tips are nice and sharp for that, because the more that you color, the wider that the tip gets. We're speeding up now, by the way. I definitely don't color this this fast. But the more that you color, the wider the tip gets. So the wider your line is when you put it down. So if you're trying to get into these little teeny tiny nooks and crannies and you don't have a sharp edge, then when you are doing it, you're going to have this wide line. Or if you're doing like stem work, you're going to have this wide stem. So that's why it's super important to just make sure you're continually sharpening. So now, how do we approach the rest of the flowers? I told you we take it in bite sizes. So I'm going to look and I'm going to find all of my centers. They don't touch each other, so I can do all of them at one time and knock them out. Then you can work on one flower at a time. You do not have to take this approach, but this is what works for me. So I find 3 or 4 petals that connect to the center, and I color those in with my base layer of white. I move on to the next flower, and then the next flower, so on and so forth. So basically I just have some centers with like that are scantily clad in their petals, right? And then I can go in, I can add my shading to these ones, make sure everything is well shaded with those, and then I will go back in and I will add in the next layer of petals and then the next layer and so on and so forth until the whole flower is finished. That, like I said, you don't have to do that. One flower at a time is totally fine. That's just not the way that I approach it. And then, like I said, this is sped up, but I did want you to be able to see kind of how these petals are meeting each other. And don't be afraid, like if your petals are tucked under other petals or they're on top of other petals and like you've already colored that flower, it's no big deal. Like this one right here, I'm just going to go back in and add that little bit of shading so that one petal looks like it's behind the other. No big deal. And even when I was doing the greenery, like because we have all this greenery around it, which I'm not going to show you because you saw me color all of the options up there. But when like I'm going around and coloring all of the greenery, I am finding other petals that maybe I missed. So it's just like constantly a work in progress. But that is okay. That's, it's a large piece. I like it because it's all the same flower. It gives me a ton of practice coloring the same flower and getting more and more comfortable as I go along. That's not going to be for everybody, but that's totally fine. You can pick a bouquet that has a lot of different flowers or not flowers at all. Just whatever works for you. But I happen to have this on my desk because I had used it for another project. And I had an idea. I had seen a card on Pinterest that I really loved. And I was like, oh, I'd really like to remake that. And then I was like, well, no, maybe I'll save it for something else. And so I wasn't committed to it. But I had the colored pencil bug, which normally does not bite me. This takes a long time for this girl because I'm just not as comfortable or as well versed with them. It's not the case for everybody. My preferred medium is markers. I find myself to be much, much faster with them. But I will say that surprisingly, this was enjoyable for me. Anyway, so here, this is me filling out the last of the leaves. I do want to say these ones did feel a little bit dark with the olive. So in order to lighten those up, you can always go back in. Like if you chose not to do a white base layer and it feels too dark, you can always go back in with the white on top of it. Here, I'm just going in and adding a little highlight to the white on top of that. And then you can blend that out with the lightest color or not, either or. So now, do you see this fluffy brush? When we're coloring, okay, oftentimes we have a tendency to, like with crayons or colored pencils, we want to swipe it away. Don't swipe it because you're just going to smear it all over your cardstock. So use the brush. I have a hard time breaking the habit of the swiping, and so on my cardstock, I do have some kind of remnants, but I'll show you how I got around that. Here for the sentiment, I treated with my anti-static tool. I stamped it in our Brilliant White pigment ink, and now I am heat setting it with some white detail embossing powder. And then this is how I'm getting around the fact that I've swiped my little crumbly bits of pigment all over my cardstock. I'm just going to die cut it out. So then that way I can just transfer it right over to, I think this is Christmas Pine from Gina K. I can transfer it right over to another piece of Christmas Pine and nobody will know the difference. It'll just be a little raised. Or you could pop it up. That'd be fun too. So then this is, because it's such a large image already, I don't really have to do anything else. I did trim down my cardstock so I could have a mat. You guys know how I am. Early 2000s, mats on mats on mats. And so I did just want a little bit to bring that white in. And then I'm just going to glue this down flat. Again, you could pop it up for some added interest. I think that would be lovely. I almost did that, and I think I was just like in the flow of just like getting it together, and I put glue on it instead. So then I just committed to the bit. And then I am going to add some rhinestones as well as some highlights. There's a little tricky thing with the highlights. So let me go ahead and get this down and lined up. And then I'm going to use my white gel pen to do the highlights after I glue my sentiment down. But sometimes a white gel pen doesn't always work as well as we would like. Because my colored pencils are wax based, and a lot of them are, sometimes the roller has a hard time putting out pigment on top of the wax. So when that happens, like I just do it on my finger a little bit to get it rolling again, and then I take it back to the paper because sometimes it can clog up that roller. Alternatively, you could use a paint pen. Or you could use a paint brush with like some gouache or white acrylic paint. There's a couple of different options. But if you're using a gel pen, you're struggling, just know that you're not the only one. And then here I use some rainbow rhinestones to accent the sentiment. And then that's it. That's the whole card. So I hope that you guys learned a little something about, coloring with colored pencils. I hope it inspires you to give something a try. This feels very spring to me, and I am looking forward to that immensely. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.